There is a specific smell to new money trying to masquerade as old. It is the overpowering, cloying scent of Casablanca lilies warring with the chemical tang of too much hairspray and the metallic sharpness of expensive champagne. It was a sensory assault that made the knot of dread in my stomach tighten until I could barely breathe. I stood at the periphery of the Gilded Cage, the most exclusive ballroom in Newport, Rhode Island. The room was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, rented for a single evening at a cost that exceeded what I had earned in my best decade of honest carpentry. I was an intruder in this world of silk and inherited wealth. I was Arthur. I was 75 years old. My hands were calloused, scarred by 50 years of handling hammers and saws, and tonight they were shaking. I smoothed the front of my suit. It was a navy wool ensemble I had bought 20 years ago for my wife's funeral. It was clean, pressed to a knife's edge by the dry cleaners on 4th Street, but the cut was boxy, the fabric slightly shiny with age. To the people in this room, men in bespoke tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds, I looked like a relic. I looked like the help. In fact, I had only gained entry by bribing a waiter at the service entrance with a crumpled $50 bill, money I needed for groceries, but which I handed over without hesitation. I wasn't here to crash a party. I was here to save a soul. My daughter, Isabella. I watched her from the shadows of a marble pillar. She was standing near the center of the room, radiant in a white cocktail dress that probably cost more than my truck. She was laughing, her head thrown back, exposing the long, elegant neck that I used to kiss goodnight when she was a toddler terrified of thunderstorms. She looked perfect. She looked like she belonged. But it was a lie, all of it. Isabella had been drifting away from me for years, a slow erosion of our bond that began the day she went to college. First, it was the correction of her accent. Then, the nose job she claimed was for a deviated septum, paid for with the savings bonds I had bought when she was born. Then came the name change. Miller was too common, she said. Montclair sounded like old money. It sounded like a legacy she hadn't earned, but desperately wanted to steal. I had paid for the finishing schools. I had paid for the semesters abroad that were really just networking events for social climbers. I had paid for the lies she told the world, thinking it was just a phase, a young girl playing dress-up in a world that demanded armor. I thought she would grow out of it. I thought she would come back to the truth. But tonight was her engagement party. She was marrying Julian, the scion of a banking dynasty that dated back to the robber barons. I hadn't been invited. I found out about the party through a Facebook post from a friend of a friend who recognized her photo. She hadn't just forgotten to invite me. She had erased me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I couldn't let her do this. I couldn't let her commit fraud by marrying into this family under false pretenses. If Julian found out later, and he would find out, it wouldn't just be a divorce. It would be a lawsuit. It would be ruin. I had to warn her. I had to tell her that the facade had to end before she signed the marriage license. I stepped out from behind the pillar. I walked toward her. The crowd parted around me, not out of respect, but out of confusion. They looked at my suit, at my weathered face, at my scuffed shoes, and they frowned. I felt their judgment like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. Isabella spotted me when I was 10 feet away. She was in the middle of a sentence, holding court with a group of women who looked like porcelain dolls, fragile, expensive, and empty. Her eyes locked onto mine. Her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. It broke into a million pieces of panic and horror. Her face went pale, the rouge on her cheeks standing out like a bruise. Her eyes went wide, filled with a primal, animal terror. She looked at me like I was a ghost. She looked at me like I was a disease. I stopped. I reached out a hand, my right hand, the one with the thick scar across the palm from a circular saw accident in '98. It was the hand that had held hers when she learned to walk. "Isabella," I said softly. My voice trembled, thick with love and fear. The reaction was immediate. It was brutal. She didn't step forward. She recoiled. She took a sharp step back, nearly knocking over a waiter with a tray of champagne. She looked around the circle of her friends, desperate to see if they had heard me. Julian stepped up beside her. He was tall, handsome in a way that money buys. Perfect teeth, perfect skin, perfect posture. He looked at me, then at Isabella, confused. "Julian?" asked, placing a hand on her arm. This was the moment, the precipice. She could choose truth. She could say, "This is my father. He's a carpenter. He built me." She could choose dignity. Instead, she chose annihilation. She laughed. It was a high, brittle sound, like glass breaking on a stone floor. It was a sound devoid of joy, filled only with a desperate need to survive the social execution I represented. "I have no idea," she said. Her voice was loud, projecting to the circle of people watching. "He must be one of the caterers, or a crasher." She looked me in the eye. She looked into the eyes she had inherited from me, the same gray-blue irises, and she erased my existence. "Isabella," she called out, waving a hand toward the door. "Please, remove this man." I stood frozen on the marble floor, the laughter of strangers raining down on me like broken glass. I looked at the daughter I had rocked to sleep when she had a fever, the girl I starved myself to feed during the recession, and I realized she wasn't just ashamed of me. She was actively killing my memory to feed her ambition. She was willing to orphan herself to become a Montclair. "Isabella," I whispered. "I don't know you," she hissed, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Get out." Then she turned back to the group, her face rearranging itself into a mask of tragic nobility. "I'm so sorry, everyone," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical hush. "It's just hard. You know, my father was a French diplomat. He died in a plane crash when I was a baby. Seeing old men like this—" The guests murmured in sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing, how brave." She spun a fantasy of tragedy over the living corpse of her father. If you've ever had your heart ripped out by the very person you gave life to, if you've ever stood in a room full of people and felt entirely, devastatingly alone because your own blood denied you, hit that subscribe button. Because what Isabella didn't know was that the caterer she just humiliated was holding a document in his jacket pocket that would turn her fairy tale into a horror story. 2 security guards appeared at my elbows. They were burly men in black suits, their earpieces coiling down their necks. They looked at me with pity. They saw a confused old man in a bad suit. "Come on, sir," one of them said gently, taking my arm. "Let's go." "I'm leaving," I said. My voice was hollow. They escorted me out. They walked me through the sea of guests, past the tables laden with lobster and caviar, past the ice sculptures melting in the heat. I kept my head high, but inside, I was crumbling. They walked me to the service entrance and opened the door. The cool night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the stifling perfume of the ballroom. "Go home, Pops," the guard said, releasing my arm. I stumbled onto the gravel driveway. My legs felt weak like water. I walked away from the mansion, the music fading behind me. I didn't cry. The sadness had been cauterized by the white-hot heat of humiliation. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I walked down the road to where I'd parked my truck, a 2010 Ford F-150, rusted at the wheel wells, filled with tools. I climbed into the cab. The smell of sawdust and old coffee was comforting. It was real. I sat in the darkness for a long time, staring at the lit windows of the mansion on the hill. Then I reached over to the passenger seat. Sitting there, illuminated by the dashboard lights, was a thick manila envelope. I picked it up. It was heavy. It contained the results of a DNA test. Not just a standard paternity test, but a comprehensive forensic genealogy report I had commissioned weeks ago when I first started suspecting the depth of her deception. I had wanted to understand why she was lying about her lineage. It proved two things. First, I was her father. The biological link was undeniable, 99%. Second, the Montclair lineage she claimed, the French diplomat, the old money, the blue blood, was a biological impossibility. The report traced her ancestry back 300 years to a line of coal miners in Wales and farmers in Ohio. Honest people, hard-working people, people she would have spat on. But there was more in the envelope. There were bank records. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I dialed a number. "Mr. Sterling," I said when he answered. Sterling's voice was sharp. He was my lawyer, a man who specialized in fraud and contract law. "I tried," I whispered. "She denied me. She called security." There was a silence on the line. Then Sterling spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "She made her choice, Arthur." "It's done," I said. "Execute the contingency." Sterling asked, "Once we do this, there's no going back." I looked at the mansion. I imagined Isabella inside, laughing, lying, erasing me with every breath. "She destroyed me first," I said. "I'm not leaving, Sterling. I'm going back in. But this time, I am not coming as a father." "I'm 10 minutes out," Sterling said. "I have the team." I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home. I was going to crash the party properly. There's a specific weight to the truth when you carry it in a manila envelope. It feels heavier than a hammer, heavier than a sack of concrete, because you know that once you swing it, you can never rebuild what you destroy. I sat in the cab of my truck, the engine idling, the heater rattling against the cold coastal air. My hands were on the steering wheel, gripping the worn leather until my knuckles turned white. Beside me, the envelope sat on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. It contained the biology of a lie and the mathematics of a theft. It was the end of my daughter's life as she knew it and the beginning of mine. I wasn't sneaking in this time. I wasn't going to bribe a waiter or slip through the kitchen. That was for the desperate father trying to save his child. That man died an hour ago on the gravel driveway when his own flesh and blood called security on him. The man sitting in the truck now was something else entirely. I was a contractor. I was a man who assessed structural damage and decided when a building was too rotten to save. My phone buzzed. It was Sterling. "We're in position," his voice said, tinny through the speaker. "Cole has tapped into the AV system?" I asked. "Julian is starting to toast," Sterling said. "They have the whole room captive. It's the perfect time, Arthur." "I'm coming in," I said. I killed the engine. I stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. I adjusted my tie in the side mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. But I didn't look confused anymore. I walked down the road toward the gilded cage, flanked by two shadows that materialized from a black sedan parked near the gate. Mr. Sterling walked on my right. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my house, carrying a briefcase that contained the legal ruin of Isabella Montclair. On my left was Cole, a private investigator who looked like a linebacker in a tuxedo. He held a tablet, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. We walked up the main steps. The valet looked at us, sensing the shift in the air. He didn't ask for a ticket. He opened the doors. The blast of warm air and expensive perfume hit me again, but this time it didn't make me feel small. It made me feel focused. We entered the ballroom. The room was silent, save for the voice of Julian echoing over the microphone. He was standing on a raised dais at the far end of the room, holding a flute of champagne. Isabella stood next to him, beaming, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She looked triumphant. She thought the caterer was gone. She thought the glitch in her matrix had been patched. "To the merger of dynasties," Julian was saying, smiling at the crowd. "To the Montclair grace and the Sterling ambition. I am the luckiest man in the world to have found a woman with such." I stepped onto the marble floor. Sterling and Cole fanned out slightly behind me. We walked down the center aisle, cutting through the crowd like an icebreaker ship moving through a frozen sea. The sound of my boots on the marble was heavy, rhythmic. Thud, thud, thud. Heads began to turn. People whispered. The circle of guests parted, sensing the momentum of our approach. Isabella saw me first. I watched the blood drain from her face in real time. It started at her neck and washed up to her forehead, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. Her smile froze, then twisted into a rictus of pure panic. She gripped the microphone stand so hard I thought she might snap it. She leaned toward Julian, whispering frantically. I knew what she was saying. "He's back, the stalker, the crazy man, do something." Julian frowned. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the spotlight. He saw me. He saw the two men flanking me. He looked annoyed, the impatience of a man whose perfect evening was being interrupted by the help. He stepped forward to the edge of the stage. "Jax," he called out into the microphone, "why is this man back inside?" Two guards, the same ones who had escorted me out, stepped forward from the shadows of the pillars. They moved to intercept me, their hands reaching for my arms. "Stop," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I used the voice I had used for 40 years on construction sites, a voice that had to cut through the sound of concrete drills and diesel engines. It was a voice of absolute bedrock authority. The guards hesitated. "Nobody touches me," I said, looking the lead guard in the eye. "Sir, you need to leave," the guard said, though his confidence was wavering. "I don't think I do," I said. The room went dead silent. Even the ambient rustle of silk dresses stopped. It was a detail I hadn't shared with Isabella. It was a strategic move Sterling had advised 3 days ago, when we realized how deep her deception went. I had liquidated my IRA, every penny I had saved for 20 years, and bought a controlling stake in the holding company that owned the Gilded Cage. It was a reckless, angry financial move. It was the best money I had ever spent. "Check the roster," Sterling barked at the guard, holding up a legal document. "Arthur Miller owns 51% of the hospitality group operating this building. He isn't crashing the party." The guard looked at the paper. He looked at me. He stepped back, bowing his head slightly. "My apologies, sir," the guard mumbled. I kept walking. I walked until I was 10 feet from the stage. I looked up at them. Julian looked confused, his brow furrowed. Isabella looked like she was going to vomit. She was shaking her head slightly, a rapid, vibrating motion of denial. "Don't," she mouthed at me, "please." I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the manila envelope. It was thick, heavy with the weight of her sins. "My name is Arthur Miller," I announced. My voice carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "I am a retired carpenter from Ohio. I drive a 2010 Ford truck with a rusted tailgate." I paused. I looked at the 300 guests staring at me with open mouths. Isabella screamed. It was a shriek, high and piercing, tearing through the dignity of the room. She grabbed the microphone from Julian. "He's lying. He's the stalker. He's senile. He thinks he's my dad. Get him out." She was frantic, manic. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "My father is dead. He died in a plane crash." Julian looked at her. He looked at her wild eyes, her sweating forehead. Then he looked at me. He saw the calm. He saw the stillness. I asked, softly, I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. Isabella scrambled back, hiding behind Julian, clutching the back of his tuxedo jacket like a shield. I held the envelope out to Julian. "Open it, son," I said. "Read the markers." Julian hesitated. He looked at the envelope. It was just paper, but he seemed afraid to touch it. He looked back at Isabella. "Why?" he asked. "Why is he?" she begged. "It's fake." But the doubt had crept into his eyes. He was a banker. He dealt in risk assessment. He dealt in due diligence. And right now, the woman screaming behind him looked like a liability. He reached out. He took the envelope. The room held its breath. Julian opened the clasp. He pulled out the stack of documents. The first page was the DNA test. I watched his eyes scan the lines. I knew what he was seeing. Subject A, Arthur Miller. Subject B, Isabella Miller, a.k.a. Montclair, 99%. He froze. He read it again. Julian whispered, his voice caught by the microphone he was still holding. "Keep reading," I said. He flipped the page. The forensic genealogy report. It showed her birth certificate. It showed her mother, a waitress named Sarah, who died of cancer, not in a plane crash. It showed the line of coal miners and farmers she came from. Then, the financial forensics. Sterling had done his work well. The report detailed the inheritance she claimed to have brought into the marriage. It wasn't old money. It was stolen money. It showed the wire transfers from my retirement accounts over the last 5 years. Transfers she had labeled as loans for medical emergencies or business startups that never existed. $200,000, my life savings, stolen to buy the dress she was wearing. Julian's hands started to shake. The papers rattled. "You stole it," he whispered, looking at the bank statements. "You told me it was a trust fund." Isabella cried, grabbing his arm. "I was going to pay it back. Julian, look at me." "It doesn't matter," Julian asked, pulling his arm away. "You're not Isabella Montclair," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, ruining the perfect makeup. "I had to. You wouldn't have looked at me if I was just a carpenter's daughter. He's nobody. He's nothing." "Cole," I said. Cole tapped his tablet. The massive projection screen behind the couple, which was meant to display a slideshow of their childhoods in Paris and Milan, suddenly flickered. The image of the Eiffel Tower vanished. In its place, a photo appeared. It was 20 feet high. It was grainy, taken on a disposable camera in 1995. It showed me, younger, with dark hair and a tool belt, kneeling in the dirt. Next to me was a 5-year-old girl in muddy overalls, holding a plastic hammer, beaming with a smile that was missing a front tooth. She was looking at me with absolute adoration. The crowd gasped. It was a collective sound of shock and recognition. The girl in the photo was undeniably Isabella. The eyes, the chin, it was her. The image changed. Isabella at her high school graduation. I was standing next to her, wearing my work clothes because I had come straight from a job site to make it in time. My arm was around her. She looked embarrassed, leaning away from me. The image changed again. A scanned copy of a check. "Pay to the order of Isabella Miller. Memo, nose job. Signed by Arthur Miller." The illusion didn't just crack, it disintegrated. It turned to dust in the air. The wealthy guests recoiled. They stepped back from the stage as if the dishonesty was contagious. They could forgive many things, infidelity, addiction, cruelty, but they could not forgive poverty masquerading as wealth. They despise the poor, but they loathe a fraud even more. Julian dropped the papers. They scattered across the stage floor like dead leaves. He looked at Isabella. His face was twisted in a mixture of disgust and horror. He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry, and he saw a stranger. "You lied," he whispered, "about everything. Your money, your family." "Julian, please," she sobbed, reaching for him. "I love you." "That's real?" he asked. He looked at me. He looked at the old man in the cheap suit who had just dismantled his life. "He's your father?" Julian said. "He paid for your face. He paid for your clothes. And you treated him like trash." He shook his head, backing away from her. "If you can do that to him," Julian said, his voice cold, "what will you do to me when I'm no longer useful?" He reached for her left hand. She tried to pull away, but he was stronger. He slid the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. It was a brutal, silent gesture. Isabella screamed, "No, Julian!" He walked over to me. He held out the ring. "I'm sorry, sir," Julian said. He sounded young, scared. "I didn't know. She told me—" "I know, son," I said. I took the ring. It felt cold and heavy. I looked at my daughter. She was on her knees on the stage, sobbing into the floorboards. She was ruined, exposed, stripped of the name, the money, and the man she had sacrificed her soul to get. She was alone in a room full of people who were already pulling out their phones to tweet about the disaster. I walked over to her. I stood over her. I waited until she looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen. She looked at me with hatred. "I hate you," she hissed. "No, Isabella," I said. My voice was heavy with the grief of a father who has just buried his child alive. "You ruined your life." I looked out at the crowd. They were silent, watching the tragedy. "You wanted to be a Montclair," I said to her. "You wanted a fantasy." I leaned down. "Well, the fantasy is over," I whispered. "You are Isabella Miller. You are a carpenter's daughter." I stood up. I adjusted my jacket. "You stole my savings, Isabella," I said, loud enough for the lawyers in the room to hear. $200,000. Mr. Sterling will handle the repayment plan." She stared at me, mouth open. "Wage? I don't—" "You do now," I said. "I suggest you get a job. I hear the venue is hiring servers." I turned to leave. I walked back down the aisle, past the frozen guests, past the waiters who were trying not to smile. Sterling and Cole fell in behind me. I walked out into the night. I could hear her wailing behind me, a high, keen sound of total loss. It echoed in the ballroom, bouncing off the gold leaf and the crystal. I walked down the gravel driveway to my truck. The air was cold and clean. It smelled of the ocean, not lilies and lies. I climbed into the cab of the Ford. I tossed the engagement ring into the cup holder next to my coffee mug. I was poorer in dollars. My retirement was gone. My daughter was gone. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw a man I recognized. I saw Arthur Miller. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had told the truth. I put the truck in gear. The engine roared to life, a rough, honest sound. I drove away, leaving the gilded cage behind, leaving the mansion on the hill, finally breathing clean air.